Oh my goodness. Good afternoon. Happy Saturday, everyone. I'm so excited to be back for another Tokeativity Social. I'm thrilled to be a part of such a beautiful community. I am Mskindness Ramirez. I often start my talks with those of you who don't already know me with that really is my name from birth. And now over 43 years ago, because it's Taurus season and I also just had a birthday. I am, as Kia mentioned, an educator, a professional educator, an author, an entrepreneur, and like many of you, a Canna Mom. And that has sort of permeated my life over the last 10 to 11 years. I think before I get into this presentation where I'm really going to talk with you a little technically about how to speak with your children about cannabis at all developmental stages, I'll tell you a little bit about who I am. So I am the CEO and founder of ClubKindness. We are a membership association committed to normalizing cannabis use through direct-to-consumer education. But who I am personally and who I've been for many lifetimes is an educator. In this life, it happens to be my profession. So I brought those skills to cannabis. In 2012, I was pregnant with our second child. I was 26 weeks pregnant when I took a really bad slip and fall on a puddle in a grocery store. I damaged my pelvis so severely that it caused a condition called symphysis pubis dysfunction. It meant that I was at risk of preterm labor and in very severe pain. At the time, I used cannabis, but I will say now I was using it recreationally. Fast forward, I do not believe there is such a thing as recreational use. It is based and rooted in the intention of the consumer. But at the time, that's what I was doing. It was for parties, it was for fun, it was for that release. I did not have a connection to its medicinal qualities and properties until I joke and say, I asked Siri, what are some natural remedies for chronic pain? And she told me, weed, bitch. I joke about that. I hope you all are laughing on the other side of this camera because I am. Anyway, I had to advocate for myself, interface with doctors, learn how cannabis could heal my body, heal my own body with cannabis, and then interface with social services as a result of that process. So ClubKindness was born, and here we are today. I've brought, again, my pedagogical skills to the cannabis space. And so let's talk about how now you can talk with your kids about cannabis. Because my goal in this life is to really work toward a future of ethical consumption. And as Canna Moms, we are the ones that are going to have to do that. And it starts at home and it starts with our children. So let's get into this. I'm going to share my screen. This is the first time I've done this, y'all. So yeah, this is me, everyone. You don't need to know more. We're going to talk about cannabis and kids and how to have the conversation. So we can go on to the next slide. And I mentioned as I was easing into this, then ClubKindness was born because I saw as a need from my own experience in having to interface with doctors, interface with social services, heal my own body, and the true lack of information that was available. At the time in 2014, 2015, when ClubKindness was born, there was really no one saying, let me teach you, consumer. Let me explain to you what's available. Let's talk about this legalization process. And there may have been people doing it, but I didn't feel like it was information being distributed in a really responsible way. So ClubKindness was born. Here we are today with several hundred members across the United States that we help really to integrate cannabis into their lives. And we call, as a part of what we call integrative wellness. Next slide. But today, we'll talk really about how to communicate with your children about cannabis at whatever developmental stage they are in. So it starts with reflective analysis. We'll go into the parent perspective framework, and there you'll identify what type of canna parent am I? Because it is only once we realize what framework we're coming from that we can decide how we want to have that conversation. We'll talk about the stages of development and some great ways of introducing cannabis at each stage of development, depending on your child's needs. And then just quick resources for application, many of which are here today, which I'm really excited about. Next slide. First thing that I always talk to parents about is looking at themselves, right? We have to consider, what is your lifestyle? What are your family's needs? If you are in a blended family, do both partners agree on cannabis consumption? How do you consume? What is your community around you? What are the laws in your locale and in your region? What can you do legally, right? Ask yourself about your intentions. Survey your intentions. What do I hope to gain from this? Why do I want to have this conversation? Is it necessary or even time to have a conversation about cannabis? Managing personal shame is one of the most challenging things to do. Typically, when we are afraid to have that conversation or there's any hesitation around it, it's because we're probably dealing with some of our own personal shame. And I want you to honor that. That comes from a long history of stigma, a long history of misinformation, a long history of lies, and frankly, systemic racism. And that has turned into our own personal shame, causing us to do things like hide in the bathroom to consume our medicine. So when we deal with that and we remove that, then we can really begin to set communication goals. What is it that I want to come from this conversation with my children? Next slide. The parent perspective framework is something we developed at ClubKindness, and it helps parents really determine which type of Canna parent are you, and determining what type of Canna parent you are is really vital in the reflective analysis process. And it'll help you to really determine how you're going to begin to have that conversation in your home. What does a reflective analysis look like? This is what it looks like. Next slide. This parent, okay, so we're going into the parent perspective framework. There are 3 types of parents that we've identified. This parent thinks of cannabis as a drug. They might compare it to other illicit substances, such as heroin or opioids, and see it as that. They still might consume it, even though they compare it to illicit substances. This parent might think of it as recreational use. Next slide. This parent sees cannabis as medicine. They use it intentionally to heal their body, and they also might combine it with other pharmaceuticals or even compare it in conversation to pharmaceuticals. If you're this type of parent, you might say, we use cannabis first and then Tylenol after you have 101-degree temperature. This parent might also look to things like essential oils or other plants. Next slide. The third type of parent in the parent framework perspective is somebody like me, y'all. That's me with my trees in my backyard. This parent perceives cannabis as essential, right? They know it's necessary. It's a component to their health and wellness. They consume it in all ways, all varieties. They're open with it. They enjoy it. And they might even be open to other plant medicine, psilocybin, and that's all they use. They rarely look to pharmaceuticals, and they never, ever compare cannabis to illicit substances. Next slide. So let's take a moment and just think, which Canna parent are you? When you're doing that, think about the developmental stage your child is in. I'm going to quickly go over in vitro. That's in the womb. That's the conversations you're having with yourself. It looks very much like the reflective analysis. How do I plan to integrate cannabis? Am I already consuming cannabis? Am I worried about consumption for my child? How do I plan to have it in my life when they are here with us? And then we move into 0 to 4. This is the infancy to early childhood stage, language formation. They really are only connecting to body signals, emotional responses, and energetic responses. At this stage, where a child is developing language, they have 0 emotional connection to cannabis. They don't know what it is. All they know is what you're showing them. At this stage, it's really important that you communicate the values you want them to implement through all of their lives, implement in all of their lives. If they don't know language, they don't have those skills, all they can read is your body, and you hide your consumption from them, the only thing you are showing them is that it's okay to deceive. And that is almost always tied to our own personal shame. And this is not to say that you should be smoking weed in front of your newborn, but this is to say that managing your energy in this stage of development is key. We move on to 5 to 10, and now this is a school-age child, and they are going into the schools. learning from systems outside of the home, hearing language that you may not use in your home. So this is when it's really important to begin to teach them the difference between industry and inferiority, how to stand up for themselves. In our schools, it went from DARE to now Red Ribbon Week. And so they're teaching them still that cannabis is a drug. If you look at your curriculum in your schools, you should know this. You should know when this week is coming up, and you should be prepared to have a conversation with your child about the facts around cannabis. And that starts with educating yourself. Use developmentally appropriate language. Use simple sentences and explain cannabis as a plant, as mom's medicine or dad's medicine, and that's it. Next slide. This next stage is a really crucial stage because this is puberty. So for those of you with children in puberty, you know you're dealing with a whole myriad of other issues. But most research lends, especially in the United States, to the fact that 60 to 70% of consumers in adulthood began using cannabis around 11 to 12 years old. So if you have this 11 to 16-year-old, I'm talking to you right now. They already know what cannabis is. They've already seen it in their textbooks. They've already interfaced with it in schools. They already know that it's probably not that bad, or they might have an opinion that it is based on how much communication has been happening in your home prior to this point and in the communities around them. But the fact of the matter is, here, they're really learning identity versus role confusion. This is the stage where they decide what they believe about this plant. A great way to have a conversation at this stage is to compare cannabis and how it works in the body with the endocannabinoid system and what they've learned in most science classes at this point with the regulatory system, the circulatory system, the respiratory system, those other systems of the body. It's an easy and simple way to begin to talk about the technicality and the science behind the plant and really teaching them about the history of it. And I'll say again, that means that you yourself have to educate. We jump into personal choice 17 to 24. I'll go also through to 25 plus for the sake of time. But at this point, you're dealing with young adulthood or adulthood. They can choose to consume. And over 44 states, they can purchase cannabis at the age of 18. At this point, they can do what they want. And here's where it's your job to begin to have conversations around how they can cultivate a future of ethical consumption. Begin to share truthful stories about your experiences. Begin to tell them how you had your first edible and how it had you in the corner, curled up in a ball, wanting someone to call 911. Begin to talk with them about your soul connection with the plant. Begin to share with them your plant medicine in a safe way. And I hate to compare it to alcohol, but in the same way that you might say, have your first drink with me so that you know what it feels like. This is the fun stage. This is an opportunity for you to ask them about how cannabis makes them feel and learn how they're going to implement it into their lives to further cultivate that future of ethical consumption. Next slide. And finally, I've talked enough. I want to sesh. I'm so excited. Here's some great resources. Obviously, I'm going to begin with my book. Okay. I geared it toward 8 to 12-year-olds developmentally, but I got to tell you, grandmas, aunts, grandpas, there are things in here that they didn't know. And it's colorful. It's loosely based on my own family. It's showing how cannabis can be normalized by growing it alongside its companion plants, the other fruits and vegetables that keep it healthy. And with that being said, it just makes it something that's not taboo, right? I'm growing tomatoes, I'm growing this other plant. It also has a glossary in the back with some of those vocab words like endocannabinoid and companion plants. It's fun. I love it. Obviously, it's close to my heart because it is loosely based on my own family. And second is Weed Mom, which I know is a sponsor for today's event. And Danielle is a friend of mine. And I love her book so much. And I highly recommend it for just the mom who's really working through managing that personal shame. Learning to identify with other mothers is what Danielle provides in this book. And it's wonderful. And then because I push for us to educate ourselves, for us to know the real science and facts behind this and not believe the propaganda, the Cannabis Health Index is my go-to when it comes to servicing our clients and consulting around how the plant works in the body and wonderful aids it can provide for healing. And last slide, I think that's just a thank you and how to get in touch. Yes, I want to say thank you to Tokeativity. Y'all know I love you. We're forever in this, ladies. And thank you all for listening and watching this. And if you have additional questions, you want to get into the nitty gritty and the details, my child is this age and I really need more resources, reach out, clubkindness.org, mskindness.com. I'm easy to find. Thank you.
Thank you, Mskindness. That was so succinct and clear. And I really appreciated just like developmental milestones and kind of grouping it like that. I think it's really helpful. And I especially loved what you touched on with younger kids that I think like applies through and through, which is like, if you're hiding things, where are you, what are you doing and where are you kind of standing with it? That if you aren't doing this, you can't expect your kids, if you're sneaking around, what do you think's going to happen? With your kids?
This idea of do as I say, not as I do. It's just completely a false narrative. It's a false story we've been telling ourselves. They're going to do what you do. So
yeah, heck yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Go Sash, go have fun. And we'll see you in the Bridges session later too. Thank you, Mskindness. Oh yes, time to toke.